Geek Legion of Doom, and this is going to be a kind of top 10 list, really. And this is one that is a somewhat of a personal list. Now, I wasn't really intending to do it like a tag video, but I would be interested to hear anyone else's response if you want to make a video yourself, or if you want to just leave it in the comments. So what I'm going to be talking about is the top 10 horror cliches and or tropes that I feel are in horror movies. Now, this is, to be clear, I am not saying this is the universally top 10 cliches that exist. This is the ones that personally bother me. So there are some cliches, for example, that, you know, that I know are out there that may bother some people, that may well people easy to think of. The girl that always trips up when she's being chased by a killer. Casting 35-year-old adults in the role of teenagers, things like that. So they may well be kind of in other people's lists, but those things bother me less than this list I'm going to tell you. Now, I'm going to do it in top 10 style, but it's not necessarily in the top 10 that bother me the most. But we're going to be talking about, and I'm going to give some context about each one. So number 10, let's get cracking. Vampires that constantly bare their fangs when they are talking, in particular in low-budget movies. So when we have vampire movies, quite often they'll obviously have the prosthetic fangs and stuff, and they'll make a big point of trying to show you the fangs whilst they're talking. Why is that an issue for me? Now, as with all of this list, I have to prefix this by saying I'm going to be talking about films that take themselves somewhat seriously rather than horror comedies, because, to be fair, you can say, oh, well, that's just a comedy, it doesn't really matter. So this is based on serious, quote-unquote, horror films. But this bothers me is because that if we're thinking like vampires, that's like a species, they wouldn't have this awkward habit of showing you their fangs when they talk. Think about like animals, think about even the way that we talk. It'll be a natural conversation. The fangs might be there, but they wouldn't have this tendency to try and like curl back their lips so you can see the fangs, so we as an audience know that they're a vampire. It just makes the whole process seem really kind of unnatural, and it prevents the actors also from being able to deliver lines properly, because they're constantly having to try and show their fangs because the director wants us to, as an audience, to realise that they're a vampire. So I feel that this particular trope needs to have a little bit more subtlety in it. If vampires do have fangs, they just need to be there, and they need to kind of talk as if these fangs are naturally there, and not these like weird sticking out pieces of teeth that are just, you know, not natural, and therefore the actor is acting unnaturally, if that makes sense. Number 9, if someone sees something very obviously paranormal happening within a movie, quite often they'll go back and act like nothing's happened. So, for example, we'll have someone, let's say in a haunted house movie, where they see something which is clearly paranormal, yeah? And this is a theme that's going to go back, and I'm going to mention it a couple of times, but this example is a bit more specific. Quite often what will happen in it, the next day, they might mention it to someone, but they'll just kind of go about living their lives in somewhat normality. When in reality, if you had seen something that was clearly paranormal, you would get out of dodge, or you would react to it in a much more realistic way. And number 8, no one ever says no to drugs. This bothers me. This is because I feel a lot of films come out of California, where the drug laws are quite relaxed. Now, as someone who doesn't ever partake in recreational drugs, it always bothers me that every single character seems to be more than willing to take drugs and stuff. And I would just like some character to say, no, sorry, I don't do drugs. Because it just makes it like every single person takes drugs. Now, I'm not here to preach to you whether you should or shouldn't take drugs. That's your own decision. But I would like at least some characters sometimes to just say, no, I don't do that. Because it just seems that even when you have nerdy characters, they seem to be sucking on a bong along with everyone else. They might be the most studious and boring character ever, but they'll be sucking on a bong in seemingly every horror movie. I don't remember one movie, really, one horror film, where someone says, no, sorry, I don't actually do that, to be honest. Okay. Number 7, this is going to maybe take a little bit more explaining. So ghosts that appear to us as the audience, but when the character turns around, they're gone. So let's give me a bit of example. So if you have for example, a movie where we have a character in the foreground, and then behind you'll see the image of, or someone like walking around behind them, some sort of ghostly image, and then The character will turn around and that will be gone. Now, why is that a problem? Okay, number one, it's kind of a trope. But secondly, think about it. Who is that ghost appearing for? Us as the audience? Are we meant to be in there as the room? In the room with the characters? So are they specifically appearing to us as an audience member? It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, because if a ghost is showing itself, so to speak, but that someone isn't looking, who are they showing themselves for? Because they're turning around, if the character, our protagonist, say, turns around and they're gone, so the ghost has decided not to show itself anymore, why did they show themselves to begin with? Who was that for? Obviously us as the audience, because we want to see it, but in the storytelling perspective, it does not make any sense. So it kind of bugs me. I think if you're going to see a ghost walking around, and I know it's just done for a scare, but narratively it doesn't make sense, because it's almost like the ghost knows that we're there as an audience member, and it's showing, oh look, I'll show the audience member, but I won't show the kind of the character who is involved in the film. It is silly. It really takes me out of the movie when it does that. Anyway, number 6, and this is probably going to be one I feel which will be on a lot of people's lists, to be fair. No reason to keep filming in found footage movies. So, in some found footage movies, you have a conceit why someone is filming. Grave Encounters, for example, they are filming a Most Haunted style TV show, so you can kind of understand. But I've seen plenty of found footage movies where there is no logical reason why someone would be still filming when they are being chased by something or something along the lines of that. It really is, it's very, very silly. And I've seen some of them where they'll even be doing they'll be running away from stuff, but doing selfies. I'm thinking, think about it. Think about that in realistic terms. You are running away from some type of entity, but you're there running around giving yourself a selfie. It does not make sense. It bothers me. It doesn't happen in every found footage film movie, but if you're going to do a found footage movie, you have to have a readable conceit why these characters are filming. Otherwise, don't do it in found footage. Number 5, this might seem like a nitpicky one, but it's one that it's one of my earliest ones. Whenever you have a group of people that go camping, to a cabin, all of this sort of thing, why is there always an odd number, yeah? If you're going to go as couples, why do you always have this one single person that is there? It doesn't make sense, because, if you are the single person, you do not want to be the fifth wheel. I can never understand why we have this. I mean, maybe sometimes, but if we have a group of people, there'll be maybe 2, 3 couples and then this odd person. That odd person simply, I don't think, would 9 times out of 10 want to go to an outing where there is 3 other couples, because it just wouldn't make sense. It'd be weirdly social awkward. It's just a Hollywood trope that bothers me. But that's maybe a little bit of a nitpicky one, admittedly. Number 4, this is one that I have mentioned in various reviews. No real fear reactions. So I've kind of mentioned about how people don't go back to normal after they've seen a paranormal event. So it kind of, in a way, a little bit like that. It's not having a realistic portrayal of what humans are like. Now, I would give you the example. When you watch a prank video, yeah? When you watch someone who is jumping out of a bush or something to scare people, that's a real fear reaction, when they're not staged, of course. But when we look at films, that is not what happens. So I would like to see films that have those kind of reactions in the film, which is very rare, I'm going to say. Most, it's like the Hollywood, oh my God, run! It doesn't happen. People just don't shit themselves, fall over themselves to get the hell out of Dodge. It does not happen. So I would like personally to see films where people would realistically react to the stimulus that is in front of them in a realistic manner, because it very rarely happens. Number 3, caricatures, not characters. So what do I mean by this? In a lot of horror movies, when we have our group of protagonists, and you can kind of, this has been pointed out in other films, particularly Cabin in the Woods, people will have a defining characteristic, but quite often that'll be the only thing that they'll have going for them. Now, people are multifaceted, they have various different points to their personality, they're not all one thing, but quite often in horror movies, people will just be this one defining character trait and have nothing else going on. So you might have for example, the stoner guy who is always pissing about and stuff like that, and being a bit of a kind of like a weird loose cannon, or the mean girl who is mean 100% of the time, and she's going out of the jock, and think, why would anyone go out there? She has no, there's just nothing more to her personality. And this is where I feel characters become caricatures, because they're just one type of personality aspect to their person, and it doesn't make any sense. People are more complex than that, and they do not. Again, it does not seem like real people. And again, it's just sloppy writing and just leaning into caricatures because you don't want to write a realistic character. Number 2, I feel, will be an unpopular one. Like the final girl trope. I think this trope is tired. Steven Spielberg, when he was making Save It Private Ryan, he said in interviews that the people who are more likely to be the survivors are probably the people who are the cowardly ones to a certain degree. Now, if you remember that movie, Tom Hanks' character died, and I think the guy who played Elliot in E.T. was the coward, and he survived because he was more cautious, ultimately, because he was a coward. Now, I'm not saying that should be true of it every time, but it just seems like I wish you'd think of who's the most likely to survive in these scenarios. Sometimes it might be a girl, and then be a final girl. But it just seems that it just happens every time, and there's no... A good movie, to me, a good horror film, is you don't know who's going to survive. It's when we have someone who is clearly the kind of like the good girl, the virginal kind of like nice girl. Okay, everyone else is going to die. There's no tension because you know that these people are just lining up to be slaughtered. To me, a good film, you don't really know who's going to die. Anyone could potentially bite the dust, and therefore it gives you tension because you don't know necessarily who's going to survive. There are a few occasions where this does happen, but they are few and far between. But that, to me, that for the final girl, where it's just that trope, and I know there's a lot of people that like it because it's a trope, but to me it bothers me. And then the number 1 for me is what I call the FU moment at the end of a movie. So what do I mean by this? This is where we have a horror film where, the last 10 minutes is the climax of the film. However, the last shot of the movie is the creature coming back to life, or something like that, or some final shot where there's a twist. And that in itself now is such a overused trope. And some of the times it doesn't make sense. It will leave you unsatisfied. It's just doing it for shock value, and ultimately becomes a very frustrating experience, unfortunately. And just to have this final "oh my god" moment, which might sound good on paper, but it's such a trope. I wish films really wouldn't do that. And if they want to have a downbeat ending, fine, but have a downbeat ending that has a conclusion at least. Don't have this ha 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 surprise. This person who you thought was dead is not really dead, and then we're just going to fade to black. I call it the FU moment at the end of the movie. It bothers me. So many movies do it. So many. It's so obvious. So there you go. That is my top 10 personal dislikes in regards to tropes and cliches that tend to be rife in horror movies. I would love to hear if any of the ones I've mentioned bother you or do not bother you. And then also what other ones personally bother you. Like I've said, there are plenty of ones you can choose from, but there might be some that necessarily don't bother you as much. And I really wish filmmakers would pay attention to things like this and not just rely on these constant tropes, and make something with some more thought involved. Having spoken to many filmmakers doing this channel, I know that a lot of the time they just push through very quickly. But I really wish that some filmmakers would take a little bit more care and put a little bit more craft into their work and really build on the success that will come from that. I don't know why it's not done more often, to be honest. Anyway, that is my thoughts on my top 10 horror cliches and tropes. Please leave me a comment. I'd love to, if someone wants to do a video response, I would love it. So I'd like to kind of hear your context about why you might feel that way, which maybe you can't do on a text reply. But anyway, thanks for watching, and bye for now.